So these are the methods we went over for ArrayList, right? You've got the get method, the set method, the size, adding these items, index of, and remove. Now the nice thing about these is that it's not really too complicated to see where you'd want to use them. You can pretty much use them anywhere that you'd like to for an array. So for the second, and that's actually going to be the focus of the second and third week for a lot of your coding. The second week will be a lot of the same exercises you probably had to do on exams, but instead of doing them for arrays, you'll be doing them for array lists. Okay, so something of a very similar manner. So it's fairly straightforward on how to make them, right? And I think, and we actually went over that in previous videos on how we can make them and how we can use them. All right. So the right here we've got an array list of. We have an array list. We add items to it, and we can get the values from it and add them to a running sum. We can pretty much do anything we want with an array that we could do with an array list that we could do with an array. So, all right. Now we're going to learn how do we make these. All right, so let's go ahead by starting to actually make something. I'm going to call it my array list, just to differentiate it from the Java array list. Now, I'm going to cheat a bit in implementing my array list. The first thing I'm going to do is that I'm not actually going to do this, at least not permanently, because I don't have the time. Implements list, right? Then I'd have all these methods that I'd have to implement. Cannot resolve symbol list. My array list, let's see, Alt Enter. Yep, import java.list, right? Alt F1. Implement methods. Let's go ahead and show you all the methods that I would need to implement list. Implement methods. Choose them all. And there they are. Okay, size is empty, contains, iterator, toArray. A lot of these I just don't want to do because they're repetitive for the sake of brevity. So I'm just going to do basically the important ones I went over. Okay? The other big thing, so first off, so let's go ahead and create my array list. So my array list, so I put this E here. This indicates that this class holds a generic type, right? And this is the type that the generic is, right? E, and we use E short for element, right? Because we're going to be dealing with individual elements in this. Other popular types are T for type, K for key, V for value. But E is what's used by Java for lists, so I'm going to use it here. Go ahead and dismiss this. Okay. So public class my array list E. Straightforward. All right. So the first thing we want to do is that we need to generate. You're probably wondering where we're going to go with this. Well, same thing we would do for writing any class. We need a We need the variables. What defines an array list? The constructors. How are we going to build it? And then the actions, what can we do with it? And and fortunately for us, we've got the list of actions right here and what we would like to do, right? So these are the actions that I'm going to implement. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. What are the variables we need to keep track of? Well, it's probably a good idea to keep track of the size. We're going to make it private as opposed to public int size, how big the list is, right? Because we don't want somebody to come in and on the outside and change our size to something we don't want it to be. Okay. There's also that capacity I mentioned. Okay, and it's very important that you understand the difference between the size and capacity. The size is how many items are in the list. The capacity is how many items the underlying array can hold. So in other words, how big is the array that's underneath the hood of the array list, right? Because the way array list works is that it uses an array. All right, so let's build that array. Let's use that array to keep track of our data. So ArrayList, let's call it the data, but it needs a type. Now, we don't know what type of array it's going to be. It's a generic type, right? It's going to be a type of these things, right? If somebody puts in string, then it's going to be a bunch of strings over here, right? It's going to be a string array. If somebody put an integer over here, it'd be an integer array. So this one's going to be an array of e's, which seems a bit odd, and it's actually a bit of a mess to work with, but that's okay. So that's what we've got here. We've got private int capacity, the size, and now we've got a place to store the data as it comes in. So now we've got to create a constructor. And I'm actually interested in seeing if Java is capable of helping me here. Constructor. Yeah, it's actually going to be able to help me here. So so we'll first build ourselves a constructor. So public myArrayList, right? And for the constructor, you don't need to say what type it is. You just do that. Public myArrayList. So, all right, let's think to ourselves, what should my default size be, right? We're going to start out with the size. When we create it, it's not going to have any items, so the size is going to be equal to 0. Makes sense there. What about the capacity? Well, we'd like it to, the actual ArrayList implementation, I mentioned that it holds 10 items to begin with. So the capacity starts out at 10. Okay? Now, what are we going to do with the data? Well, we need to make an empty array that's 10 items long. So the data is equal to, well, and this gets a bit confusing here actually. So your instinct might be, okay, so new E, right, 10. Except you get into this weird Java error that I don't quite want to, it says the parameter type E cannot be instantiated directly. It's saying that basically I can't create it says actually that I can't do something like this. E is equal to new E. It gets into this whole thing where basically it says we don't know what E's are, so we don't know how to build them. We don't even know if it has this constructor, right? And even though it's going to be creating a list of nulls, it just prevents you from doing that. Which means you have to... So that's very frustrating that it's implemented like this. Although there's a fairly benign way to get around it, which is just simply say, well, it's an array of objects, but we're going to cast it into a bunch of E's anyway. Right? And I kid you not, this is the way the textbook says to do it. Right? Let me go through the textbook. Boop, 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 boop. Says to do that. It allocates storage for an array of type of object, and then casts the array object to type E. Right? So basically it's saying let's create. So you don't understand it? That's fine. Well, I'm gonna try my best to explain it right now. And it's not the most important thing in the world either. But what we're doing over here is that we're creating creating 10 slots to store what? Objects. What gets stored in object variables? Memory locations. And the size of the memory location doesn't really vary from one object to another. It doesn't vary. So it's perfectly fine for us to create 10 slots and then to tell Java that these slots are intended for type E. You don't have to do this for anything else except when we're dealing with these generics over here. It's kind of frustrating that this is the way we have to do it, but there you are. So that's the constructor. I'll pick up in the next video right where we left off.